Red Dragon Inn, Red Dragon Inn. You're going to the Red Dragon Inn? Okay, Red Dragon Inn. Red Dragon Inn, a location in the Hollows. You're going there to find Chief Bugbear, right? Okay, hold on a second. I want to see if he notices you. Chief Bugbear. Chief Bugbear. Chief Bugbear. Okay. Probably in this one. Chief Bugbear. Chief Bugbear. Okay, I got it. We've all been there. We've been game masters. We're running our homebrew or published adventure, and the player characters are going in a particular direction. You have to reference something in the book, but books are done in a linear fashion, and sometimes they're not organized very well. And role-playing games aren't necessarily a linear story. So we use books to convey elements of the story. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Notion. It's a productivity application that you can use for free. I'll have links down below. Notion can also be used for journaling, note-taking, project management, but I'm going to show you how to use it for setting up your role-playing game and some of the details to include player characters, non-player characters, locations, items, and how they can all be interlinked so that when your player characters decide to go to the Hollows and visit the Red Dragon Inn and they find Chief Bugbear, and instead of having to page through a tome over and over, back and forth with sticky notes throughout, in Notion, you'll have backlinks and links to each component, which allows you to jump around very easily and not lose your place as a game master. Next on How to RPG. All right, we've installed Notion locally on our computer, and we've launched it and logged in. This is what you'll typically see by default. Getting started page talks to you a little bit about Notion along with creating a page and a video from YouTube. On the left-hand side is the navigation. Looking specifically, we have Getting Started, Quick Note, Personal Home, Task List, Journal, Reading List. Those are just default types that are installed for Notion and presented to you. Now, you could use these for other things, but for right now, what we're going to do is we're going to create a page. We're going to use that page as a bit of a dashboard, and then we're going to put those items onto that page so we can just shrink up our left-hand navigation. You don't have to do this. It's purely optional. Consider it more house cleaning than anything. So in Notion, most of the content types are going to start with a page. So we're going to create a new page. We're just going to call it default. Hit enter, and we'll create, and now it'll be blank. On the left-hand side, we're just going to take each one of these headings and we're going to drag it into default. As you can see, they appear on the default page. So we haven't lost them or deleted them. They're still there. And then when we extend our navigation, you could see all of them nested underneath the default page in case we want to use them later. Now we're going to go ahead and set up a workspace for our role-playing game. There's a couple ways you could approach this. You could set up one workspace for everything role-playing game, or you could specifically set up one workspace per campaign or game that you're going to run. In this case, I'm going to set up one, and as you get to know Notion, you'll be able to customize it to your preferences. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and create a page. We're going to call it Rogues and Raiders. It's a Forbidden Lands game. And in Forbidden Lands, you play Rogues and Raiders in a cursed land. So we have Rogues and Raiders. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and create an icon or add an icon. When I click this, it puts one in by default. In this case, it's not really going to match the look and feel for my game. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. It'll come up with a menu that I can choose from. I can choose from the emojis, upload an image, or select a link on the web. In this case, I'm going to upload an image. The nice thing about putting an avatar in here, or an icon, is that it will add a little bit of spice to your page, and it also puts it down as a little icon next to your page content in the navigation, which makes it easier to find different things. That's why in default, it's nice to have this pin, this home, this journal. It's easier to find things. Next thing we're going to do is going to add a cover. It's just another image, spruces it up a little bit. We add cover. Again, it selects a random one from the gallery. This one we could keep, but we're going to go ahead and customize it a little bit. So in this case, we're going to hit change cover, and much like the icon, it comes up with different options where you could choose from gallery, you can link to something on the internet, or you can upload something. We're going to go ahead and choose an image. Now this is what we would call our default workspace for this particular game. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and create our database, which is going to be the core engine driving some of the details that we'll later get into. To do that, there's a couple different ways. We click on the page and you'll see our cursor here blinking. We can hit the plus and it'll come up with the different content types that we can select from. Or we can hit the / and bring up the same menu. In this case, we're going to go ahead and scroll down. But if you know the name, you could do / and begin to type it, and we'll autocomplete and filter as you type. So we're going to go ahead and pick Table Database, Full Page. We're going to name this database Campaign Database. And as you'll notice at the top, it has breadcrumbs. So this makes it easier to navigate some of the tables and some of the content types that you're going to be creating. Campaign Database falls under Rogues and Raiders. If we go back, you'll notice it's now on the Workspace page. We can click on that, and it takes us to the Campaign Database. This is a specific table. Now what we need to do is go ahead and flesh out the table a little bit, and then we'll get into some really good stuff here. So the name column we're going to go ahead and keep, just name. Now we could change the title of this column. Say we wanted to call it player name. But you'll notice if I right click on this first column, it gives me some options to add filter, sort, insert another column. When we go to the tags column and right click, you'll notice we could delete it. But the first column, there is no delete option, nor is there a hide option. So the first column in most of the database table types that you'll get is not changeable, except for the column name, the filters, and whether you want to insert something left or right. So say we wanted to insert a column to the left. We right click. We could delete it. We could duplicate it. We can even hide it. But the player name, the original column that was created, still has the same options, no matter where it's located in the table. Consider it a primary key where it's just not going to be able to be altered. So we're going to go ahead, remove the first column we created, and then we're going to just call this name for now. Like much of the web, you can use tags to identify different content types. In our database, we're going to use tags to identify different things within our campaign. Some of those things that I'm referring to are location, NPCs, villains, items, players, player characters, things of that nature. So, for example, we're going to create these right now. Location. If we hit enter, it automatically creates one tag. Then we're going to put in NPC, enter, villain, enter, item, NPC. Now, you could put many more tags in here depending on the different things you want to keep track of within your campaign. We're just going to start with these as a good overall example. As you'll notice, with the tags, the column type, and the content type for tags, it's this multi-select, which means if we choose multi-select, we can choose to have more than one tag associated with a specific record. So if you're not familiar with database terms, if you look at this one row, I'll just put in name, Sean, and I'll put in all the tags we've created. This row is a record. If we put in another one called Shelly, maybe we only know Shelly as the player character. This would also be a record going from left to right. We're going to go ahead and delete this record. The way I'm doing that is just right-clicking. Submenu comes up and we can click delete, copy, move to, or edit property. So we want multi-select because we could have Sean associated with as an NPC and as a villain. Maybe even a player character and a villain. So we want that to be multi-select. If we didn't want it multi-select, we would just choose the select property, in which case we can only pick one of the ones that we created, one of the tags that we created. Right-click on tags again, hit select, choose multi-select. So I'm going to go ahead and enter a few records into this so that we can flesh some things out on other pages. So taking some notes from my current campaign, we'll put in Hargamar. We know Hargamar is a player character. Rust Brothers, NPC, villain, Kasha, PC, Varin, PC, Golgara, PC, The Hollows, location, and Twin Rings, which is an item. Now we could add columns to this, but it isn't necessary for what we're setting up. So we have our campaign database started. Now let's start fleshing it out and really start to see the power of Notion and how it's going to help your campaign in keeping things in a neat and orderly fashion, but not necessarily linear. Keeping track of some of the details of the player characters can go a long way. I like to keep track of some of their background information, jot some notes into their record, and it's a good place to keep things that you might want to know depending on the type of game that you're playing. For example, if you're running D&D 5th edition, you may want to know the player character's armor class or passive perception. Those things can be annotated in the player character container under the relative record. Let's get creating that. We're back at our dashboard. We're going to go ahead and create a page. Page is going to be called Player Characters. We're going to go ahead and click create an icon. The hammer, well, I don't know if it's completely apropos for this, so we'll change it. Select cross swords. It's a fantasy game after all, right? Then what we're going to do is we're going to, on the player character page, bring in the campaign database that we've already created and sits above here in the left-hand navigation. In order to do that, we're going to go ahead and either hit the plus sign or the /. Start to type database. And the one that we specifically want is create linked database. When we select that, it's going to ask us which database we want to use. In this case, we're going to select campaign database, and underneath it'll say rogues and raiders. It's important to note that because if you start setting up multiple campaign settings, campaign workspaces, things of that nature, and campaign databases, you may have campaign database listed 3 or 4 times, and when you select the wrong one, you're going to know it. You want to bring in the correct one so it brings in the correct information stored in that database. So we select that. As you can see, this table that it's brought in and is embedded on the player character page is the same campaign database we've already created earlier. Going back to the player character page, and we extend it, you'll notice on the left-hand side, we have the player character page, the campaign database shortcut, and then it says table, which is the view that we have by default. So we want to create a couple different views. First of all, we don't want in our player characters to see the location, items, NPCs, or villains. We just want the player characters to show up in this table. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a right click on tags and add a filter. Filters for the table where tags contain, and we're going to select PC. And when we do, we can see now it's only the name of the player characters, and they are noted by the appropriate tag, which is player character here. From this point, we can actually go ahead and add a different view other than the table. We're going to select gallery. It puts a check mark next to it showing we've selected that. Then we're going to hit create. Again, it's a gallery view, but it's not filtered. It still brings in all of the locations, items, villains, and NPCs. So from here, we have to create another filter for this specific view. We do so by going over here to this ellipses, bringing up this menu, going to filter. You'll notice that it hasn't built anything into this filter at this point. So we need to go ahead and click add filter. We only want to add a filter. We don't want to add a filter group. Here we want to select tags, where tags contains PC. And now you'll notice that each player character has what looks like a card. Now I like this view because I'll show you in a second, because it kind of looks pretty nice once you're done. We'll go ahead and hit Golgara. You'll notice the tag field here has PC. If for some reason Golgara becomes an NPC, we can always just switch Golgara to NPC. And then what will happen is it'll remove Golgara from the player character sheet and filters. So if I were to click off of this, but go back to this original sheet, you'll notice that Golgara is gone. If we go back to the table view, Golgara is no longer listed. How do we get her back, Sean? Well, there's a couple different ways. The easiest way is probably just to go back into the campaign database, find Golgara, because this set contains everything, and change the tag back to player character. And when we go back to the gallery view, Golgara has reappeared. We'll click on Golgara. You'll notice it says open as page. We can go ahead and do that. So by clicking on this card, it actually takes us into Golgara and their respected page. Again, pages are really at the core of Notion. So in this, I can put in background information. As a matter of fact, I could even do heading. I could do heading 2. Another heading 2. Now, by putting in headings, what I also can do is with headings, I can put in a table of contents. So again, / type table, and you'll notice down below it says table of contents. I could select that, and you'll notice that it puts the headings, and I can navigate from the top of Golgara's page. So if this gets longer, I can use the table of contents to jump down the pages. It comes in handy for things that are overly robust and something to consider as you start fleshing out some of these pages in your campaign details. I'm also going to go and put an image. This time I'm going to go ahead and click the plus. I'm going to scroll down this list until I find image. I can upload an image or embed a link to an image. I'm going to choose an image. Now, on the page, you'll notice I have the table of contents at the top and then the text down below. You could certainly use this. But if you'll notice, if I go back to gallery view on the left, you'll see the image that shows up on the card. I'm going to go ahead and click reposition. And I'm going to drag this image down so I can see Golgara's face. Then I'm going to hit save position. And now it gives me another visual representation of the record I want to view. The reason I show this is because if you get the image too far down the page, what may happen is when you go to the card, this image may not appear, where the text may appear that's higher up in the page. Right now, it doesn't display that, so we're safe. But as the table of contents gets longer, this may push the image down further, therefore pushing the image down on the card further. And there's not much you can do about that. So what you may want to do is take this image, drag it up to the top of the page, and then have everything else below the image. We can also shrink the image if we wanted to, or make it smaller or bigger. And you'll notice as I resize the image on the page, it didn't resize it in the gallery view, which is nice because now I don't have to scroll down that far to get down to the content. Now what we can do on this page is we can start adding more details to this content type. For example, if we wanted to say what level Golgara is, we could put in the property and we could select the type. We're going to keep it text. Yeah, we could turn it to number, but numbers are usually for currency, decimals, percent, etc. We'll just put first. We could put in, in Forbidden Lands, there's a dark secret for player characters. We're definitely going to make that text. Fled my clan for forbidden magic. So these things may be things that I want to reference right away before even scrolling down. In D&D 5e, you might say passive perception. You could keep that text, or you could even call it AC and not even spell it all entirely out. So passive perception maybe 4, 12, and AC 15. Now, if we wanted to, we could go to table, and you can see it's easier to just type in the table quickly across per record. And what we can do is also move some of these fields. So we can go ahead and drag this and reorganize the columns if we wanted to. We can also hide this last column called tags, because we already know they're player characters because we're in the player characters page. We go to gallery view, we just see Golgara's picture and name. But what if we just wanted to go here and have all these up at one time, and we wanted to know everybody's passive perception by just looking at this gallery view? Well, we can do that. We'll go ahead and click these ellipses, go down and select properties, and you'll notice that we can change the card preview, which is the page content. We can do it to page cover. That's where we're bringing in the image. The card size, we can make them smaller or make them larger, like medium. We could do fit image. So if we resized it and want the size to be adjusted on the preview, we could do that. And then down below where it says show in gallery, what we may want is some quick reference fields that we want to see by just looking at the card, in which case maybe it's armor class and passive perception. Now notice it just brings in the values and not necessarily the labels. And here we can also rearrange these on how they show up on the card. So for example, maybe I want the name, their AC, passive perception, and then dark secret. Or maybe I want description. Now, one might think, well, just put the description down below. And you could certainly do that. But the advantage of putting it up above is now with the properties of the cards, I can actually turn that on, hide the dark secret, and you could see the description right on the card. If we wanted to go to table view, this is what the table view would look like. And we can actually adjust these column widths. As a matter of fact, we're going to call this PP instead of passive perception and have it spelled out. It gives us some more consolidated space. Now you'll notice next to Golgara, there's a little icon here in the table view. What that signifies is that Golgara's page, should we open it, has content in it. You'll notice that Kasia, Varan, and Hargamar do not have the icon, which means that those pages are not completed. There's no content. So if we want to put something in Kasia's information, we could do that. And you'll notice when I open her, all the fields that I put in for Golgara are listed under Kasia as well. So let's say we flesh out Kasia. Say Kasia's second level, Dark Secret is Sorceress. I get Spell Sorceress. If we were playing D&D, maybe she's got a passive perception of 12, an armor class of 13, dark hair, leather armor, black eyes, should be, I was going to say black eyes, but that doesn't sound good. Dark brown eyes, dark piercing brown eyes. Down below, we're going to put in an image. Choose an image. Shrink it down a little bit. Click off, and then you'll see we'll reposition Kasia there. Now notice we didn't have a field of table of contents or any content in the page. If we wanted to, we could just simply copy, make a template for one adventurer, and then copy it into each one and paste so that it at least had all the headings properly. I'm not going to go ahead and do that right now, but you could see this is how we create a player character within our database. We're back at our campaign workspace. Now we have the campaign database and the player characters. I'm not going to reference the campaign database directly. It's more of a reference type. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and put player characters, move that up to the top of the list. I'll probably reference more of that particular page than the campaign database. Going back, using the breadcrumbs above, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create another page. And this one's going to hold NPCs. Add an icon for NPCs. Going to do it similar to how we used and set up player characters. We're going to type in database, create linked database, campaign database rogues and raiders, and it brings in the page again. Now you'll notice that this campaign database has gotten a little bit bigger. It's got the armor class column, it's got the dark secret column, and the perception, passive perception, level, things of that nature. Well, for NPCs, we could still use the same type of abilities and skills to be displayed in case we wanted to use quick reference, or we could filter those out and even hide the columns. In this case, because it's similar to player characters, we're going to filter this because we obviously need to, because it's only non-player characters and we have all the different types listed here. So first thing we're going to do, select filter, add filter, name. We don't want name, we want tags, contains, NPC. If the NPC doesn't have a dark secret, we can actually hide that column. If it doesn't have a level, we can hide that column as well. And we're going to move this to AC, passive perception, and then the description. Then we're going to also add a view called gallery, create. But because it's a new view, we have to go and create a filter for this view as well. Tags, contain, NPC. And now we got the Rust Brothers. In these records here, if we click on the card, we'll see level, dark secret, passive perception, AC, description. So again, we could choose to hide this property, to always hide or hide when empty. We can also put in an image. Don't know if I have one for Rust Brothers. We'll just use an old player character's image. Reposition. Save position. Now when we click in here, we could put in details much like we did with the player characters. Now we have this one down as villain, but we can actually uncheck that and the NPC would still show up. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want NPCs and villains to show up on your NPC list, or if you want villains and NPCs to be separate, you need to be able to do that. Most villains are going to be NPCs. So I would look at this where an NPC, in this case, we're going to have the Rust Brothers as the villain and an NPC. And you can also create a villains only page, much like you did with the player characters, and just filter it only by villains. So with the NPCs, you could say NPCs, and that can hold NPCs and villains, and then you can choose to have your villain container only display villains. I think you get what I'm putting down. So that's the NPC database. In this location, if you had D&D Beyond, what you could do is if this was a creature or a monster, you could link to the D&D Beyond, DSRD. You can embed it here. So let's say this was for D&D Beyond, or just in general. Let's say this was let's just make one. NPC. We'll call him Chief Bugbear. And of course, they're a villain, so we're just going to add villain to their tags. Then what we're going to do, Bugbear, D&D 5e. Here's the Bugbear from D&D Beyond. I'm not even signed in. But what I can do is put this link, copy, flip back over to Notion. I could just choose to paste. And when I do, Notion automatically detects that it's a hyperlink, and I could just paste it as is, which I would hit dismiss, or I could create a bookmark, or I can create an embed. If I create an embed, you'll notice it brings in a little bit of a more robust display. Now, if I click on this, it goes to the D&D Beyond monster stat block. If I wanted to, I could still type in the passive perception, the AC, and probably the hit points for the monster. I could put that in as a field. Now with Chief Bugbear, now hot linking is never a good practice, but if you wanted to, you could do copy image address, insert image, embed link, and now it brings that image in. We're going to shrink it down a little bit. And you'll notice now we've got Chief Bugbear. We have NPCs here. If we didn't want to go into Chief Bugbear's record here, or card, but we still wanted to get valuable information from this quick reference page, then what we'll want to do is go ahead and click on the ellipses, click on properties, and then again, make sure that we show in the gallery view maybe his armor class and probably hit points. So we can add a property straight from here called hit points or HP, and we're going to keep that as a text as well. Then we want to show that. How many hit points does a Bugbear have? 27. And its AC, 16. Again, the only downfall is that it doesn't say AC 16, HP 27. One way around that is if we typed it in here. Now when we go to gallery view, it says AC 16, HP 27. The reason the Rust Brothers doesn't show up with that information is because they're empty. All right, things are moving along pretty well at this point. We've got player characters entered. We've got a couple NPCs entered. Now we're back at our workspace again, and you can see player characters at top, NPCs, and then campaign database at the bottom. Now what we could do is if we wanted to even make this a 2-column layout, we could take NPCs, click, hold, and drag, and put them to the right of player characters. And now we have a 2-column layout for our workspace. You'll notice on the left-hand side, the order as well. We could change the order here. But the order on the left-hand nav also affects the page content. All right, to this point, I've showed you how to create a workspace, how to create different pages, and within those pages, how to link to the campaign database. Once we have those pages created, in this case, player characters and NPCs, we can change and filter by the tags. So for player characters, filtering by the PC tag, and NPCs filtering by NPC or villain tag. Then we set up different views like gallery, applied different filters to each one of those, pertinent to player characters or NPCs. So if you wanted to create an items page or say, for example, a locations page, which I would highly encourage you to do, you know how to do that now. It's very similar in makeup. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward and create both of those right now. We have player characters, NPCs, items, and locations set up in our campaign database, and their corresponding pages, of course. So the next thing we should do is probably set up a session template. A session template is something that you can use to prepare individual gaming sessions. Now, I subscribe to the Sly Flourish method, and we're going to be using some of that. We'll put a link down below to Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, a book by Sly Flourish, aka Mike Shea. So we're going to put some of our notes over here. We're going to go ahead and create a page. We're going to call this template. Template session. And the purpose of this is we're going to use this and duplicate it every time that we want to do some session prep. So we're going to bracket this off. Template. We'll just do this. Session notes. Date. Session title. We're going to do in H2, call it characters. Then what we're going to do is put in a checkbox or to-do list. Mike likes to go with the strong start. So H2. And the strong start is just what you plan on kicking off the session with, whatever that may be, whether it's in media res or something similar. And again, some of these details in your session notes, make them your own. To-do list gives you the checkboxes. Whoops. Mike likes to call it fantastic locations, or have a section for fantastic locations. So scenes might be something that you frame up like a television show, things that the characters are going to run into, in a specific zooming in, zooming out. Fantastic locations. These are going to be linked to probably locations within your campaign database. We're going to use a bulleted list for this. Well, let's see. Another H2, NPCs. And then a bulleted list. Then we're going to do monsters, but not before we create the H2 tag. And then each monster is going to be bulleted list. Treasure, and I'm using a bulleted list for treasure. Again, these can be anything you want. Now, with Mike's template and his outline, he uses a scratch pad, which he uses to jot down notes during the game. It's used best for text-based combat tracking, anything of that nature. You just copy and paste details from Discord into the scratch pad. Now, I don't usually typically use this, nor do I use some of the nittier, grittier text-based interfaces on the web. So usually I will just keep scratch pad out and use session notes. And session notes will be a bulleted list. And that's a pretty good template. All right. Now we're going to start getting into some really cool stuff with Notion. So say, for example, we have our player characters. We have our NPCs, an item or two, and maybe a location or two. What we're going to do is go ahead, we're going to right-click, select duplicate, and now we have a copy of the session notes. Now what we're going to do is just remove this template, session notes. We're going to put in today's date of this recording, which would be 11/26/2021. And session title, which we could just simply type session 1, session 2. Session title, we could say The Adventure Begins. Now I start to do my prep. I review the characters. So I go ahead and play our characters, look on their backgrounds. So I reviewed them, and I'll take some details out of those backgrounds and then apply them to the session. The strong start. Now, here's where I'll show you some details on how things start to relate to other pieces within your campaign database. So for example, the strong start. We'll use the @ symbol and type GOL, Golgara. And you'll notice as soon as I hit @ and then type GOL, Golgara pops up. And I can link to their page. So click that, type in Kasha, start out at the Hollows, which is a location we have in our database. You'll notice each one of these are linked. Now if I click on Kasha, it goes straight to Kasha's page. If I want to go back, I can go to the top nav next to the breadcrumbs and select go back. It'll take me back to the previous page I was on. Or if I click on Kasha again, I can navigate through the breadcrumbs. Or you'll notice this newly created backlink. If I click on that, it says it's one backlink, and under that it says session notes. As Kasha's name begins to proliferate through session notes, locations, other NPCs, things of that nature, these backlinks will increase. And when I select them, I can choose where to go from here. So now things aren't as linear as an RPG book. You can start going from your session notes to the location. And in this location, if you had an NPC, for example, home of @ Chief Bugbear. Now as I talk, I can look at my notes as somebody goes to the Hollows and I go, oh, it's home of Chief Bugbear. Who's Chief Bugbear? I click on Chief Bugbear. Now it takes me to Chief Bugbear's page. Now again, I can go backwards. Click on Chief Bugbear. Read Chief Bugbear's information. Note that he's an NPC villain. Here's the stat block. Also, Chief Bugbear has a backlink. And he has a backlink to the Hollows. So I can go there. And obviously, we can always navigate based on the left-hand nav. Going back to session notes, if we ever get lost, we can start filling in the scenes. Say there's a bar, Red Dragon Inn. And if we wanted to, we can create a new page straight from here. New Red Dragon Inn page in. Now, one thing you can do is if you do hit @ Red Dragon Inn, you can create a new page, but it won't be put into your campaign database unless you drag it into that. So there is a little bit of clunkiness here. So you can make subpages as well. Not a big fan of doing that. I always like to put things in the database. So let's say, for example, if we're going to create a scene and there's a location, maybe it's not in our database. Because anything you type into Notion is instantly saved, you can just simply hop off a page and go to, say, for example, locations. Go here, do new, call it Red Dragon Inn. Well, where's Red Dragon Inn located? Located within at the Hollows. Now if we go to the Hollows, there's two backlinks. Red Dragon Inn and session notes. So as you start fleshing out certain establishments, that are located in the hollows, those will be listed here as content types that you can navigate to relatively quickly. If we just say, at Chief Bugbear hangs out here, now Chief Bugbear is referenced at Red Dragon Inn as well as the hollows. Now you can start, again, moving around relative information for when your player characters start to go off of a less linear path. Going back to the session notes. Scenes. At Red Dragon Inn. A place the party may find shelter from the elements. So maybe something where they go and venture to. We can continue fleshing this out. Fantastic location. Well, we have only 3 locations in there currently. But say we say the Hollows. But now if we wanted to, we have this listed here, and we know that the player characters go there during our session. We can now click on this. Brings us to the Hollows page. We can have all kinds of information here in the Hollows. We could tag all kinds of different NPCs, items, whatever we would like that's located in our database, which allows a hyperlink and backlinks. We may have, VIPs, Mayor, Burgomeister, the Town Watch, all listed here is NPCs in our database, but also with them being affiliated within a location. Session notes, going back. Here we've got Chief Bugbear. Who was the other NPC we had? Russ Brothers. And then, of course, we could continue to type our session notes as things progress. The party makes their way to the Hollows. I could tab in, nested bullet points, meet Chief Bugbear at Red Dragon Inn. Now, if I notice we go here, it doesn't increase the backlink if it's mentioned more than once, which is nice. That way, if you reference them more than twice in a particular page, it doesn't list the page twice. So you could get very liberal with connecting to these entries. Now, you may not like this particular type of outline where you have scenes, fantastic location, and NPCs. You may just do certain notes and reference these. And the idea is that you could use Notion for when the party starts to do things and they say, we want to go to the Hollows. Fantastic. You start reading the Hollows description here. And, oh, by the way, say reputable establishments at Red Dragon Inn. We can insert some more locations. And we could say they go to the Red Dragon Inn. Here's the details about the Red Dragon Inn, which probably includes some non-player characters. Could even put in notes, like session notes. Or if we wanted to, we could say session, we could put in a table. We could just say session number notes. And now we could say 01. Party arrives and runs into Chief Bugbear. 02. They were here. Days later, party notices a Rust brother. And we can make this a little bigger. Very simple. Now, once we have these pages, we could start putting in different items in here. We could put in a link if we need to the web. Maybe it's a stat block, piece of art that you find online. And you can get creative within the base of, or the body of the page. So we have session 1. Here's some of the details. Another thing I like to include, going back to our dashboard, is a page called Stars and Wishes. If you're not using Stars and Wishes, it's an invaluable campaign tool that you can use. Essentially what it is that everybody at the table, after the completion of a session, lists the stars, which are the highlights that they appreciated during the session, things that took place, highlights, if you will, whether it was good character play, somebody role-played something really well, killing the great big monster, whatever that case is, and it goes around the table, and even the game master is included. Wishes may be something that didn't occur in the game session, something that the players want to see in future sessions. And what I like to do is you can use Stars and Wishes. I would probably create a database, Stars and Wishes. I would call this player. Tags, I would use star and wish. And then what I would do is I would make this select so that it would only be one or the other. And I would put in myself, star, and probably make this a text field and name it note. So now I could say, loved it when we spoke to Chief Bugbear. And I can even tag them within this field. Now you'll notice that the player has their own sheet now. Notes, tags. Could use more combat. Now what you could do is you could filter this. Add a filter. You could do it by tags, is, star, and filter by stars, and then you could also filter by wishes. If you wanted to see all of them, just remove the filter. You could do a sort as well, so that if you wanted to put all your stars at the top and the wishes at the bottom, you would probably also want to put in the session. That way you can also sort by session number. So if you wanted to go back to session 1 and look at wishes, then you can incorporate that maybe into session 3 that's coming up. Something that you probably didn't incorporate into session 2. Sean likes to have more combat. There wasn't as much. Okay, great. So as I do prep for session 3, if this were session 3, then I would say, oh, we better put scenes. Sean's character, Kasha, whoever Sean's character is approached by a villain and they're hostile. So now I have my campaign database. I usually keep that at the bottom along with any templates. But I have on the right-hand side kind of, I would say, ongoing notes, maybe not overly needed. And then on the left-hand side, player characters, NPCs, items, locations, as well as stars and wishes. As a matter of fact, stars and wishes, got to have a star. So now you're starting to see the power of Notion as you start using the @ symbol to reference elements within your campaign database. Now, if we go back to our campaign database, you'll notice it's becoming quite a bit more robust. And from here, you could choose to hide different columns if you'd like. You could also move them around if you'd like. The one thing that you could do is create this campaign database for multiple games that you're running if you use the same type of schema. And what I mean by that is if you have PCs, NPCs, villains, locations, items, fantastic. You may even want to create another tag for the campaign name. So if you wanted to, you could say Forbidden Lands. Or you could also create another column. So let's get some real estate here. Shrinking these up. Call it campaign. Use tags. And probably use, if you wanted to, you could use multi-select if you wanted to use a specific item across multiple campaigns. Or if you wanted to make it very individual to a specific campaign, then you would just use select. So here we could do Forbidden Lands, or even better yet, Rogues and Raiders. And we'll probably want to move this over. Make it the first character, first column. And perhaps this one is Forgotten Realms. Well, now what can happen is now you can centrally locate all of your player characters, non-player characters, items, and locations all into one single database. And as you create more workspaces for different games, you can lean on the entries that are in that campaign database. It's a lot to take in, but hopefully in this video, you've seen the power of Notion and how to tie everything together so that it's easily navigated by you as you run your specific game. Of course, there's going to be times when maybe there's not an entry for something that you're trying to reference, and that's okay. You can always put it in later. But if you keep your database up to date, then navigating adventures and scenarios through your session notes, it's going to be a lot easier. You're not going to be paging through 20, 30 pages to find a particular detail. But the important thing is you got to have the details here. Again, Notion is a very powerful tool. You can use it for lots of different things in your life. For RPG campaigns, I just showed you one specific way that helped me organize my session notes and relative information within the game that I'm running. It's truly an invaluable tool that I find very, very useful. Hopefully you will too. If you are a Notion user and you've attempted to give this thing a try, please let me know how it went down below in the comments. And if you found value in this video, please give me a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And remember, be a positive force in the tabletop RPG hobby.